Welcome, everyone. Sorry about that. Just little technical difficulties. I'm going to share my screen now. All right, welcome. My name is Grace Musser. I am co-president of Catholic Relief Service Ambassadors at St. John's University. We are so happy you're able to be here today. Been really looking forward to this panel all semester. So CRS has been involved with St. John's University as a campus chapter since 2015. We do a lot of different advocacy activist work. Some of it is, meeting with local legislators or national legislators. Just in January, we actually met with some legislators to talk specifically about putting relief money for international relief in the COVID relief bill that just got passed. Sorry, I know I said relief a lot, but it's important. We also focus on environmental sustainability, hunger and poverty, human trafficking and migration, and fair trade. Virtually, this past semester, 2 semesters, we've been doing a few campaigns on our Instagram. One of them has been aligning with the CRS Rice Bowl campaign, which we'll go into detail about a little bit later, but highlighting some meatless meals from around the world, some simple recipes that we've been making and posting online, sharing with people, and sharing some information on food security and sustainability. So those are just a few of some of the things that we do. St. John's CRS, I'll pass it off to Kathy from Villanova.
Thank you, Grace. It's such an honor to be with everyone here today. My name is Kathy. I'm the Faith Information Coordinator for the Villanova University CRS chapter. Villanova has had a partnership with CRS since May 2005, and the Student Ambassador Program has been a very important part of what the school does to support the organization since. Our chapter focuses on many of the issues that Grace had touched on. Our chapter specifically this year has focused on migration and climate change with some of our programs and initiatives, including holding a vigil for those who have died because of our U.S. immigration system, as well as various educational campaigns and activities focusing around climate change, and also encouraging our fellow students to write to their senators in supporting the Global Child Thrive Act.
Hi everyone, I'm Holly. I'm treasurer for St. John's chapter of CRS, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about what CRS is. So Catholic Relief Services is an international relief organization reaching people in need in over 100 countries around the world. CRS is rooted in the Catholic faith, valuing the sacredness of life and human dignity, and it founds itself in the Catholic social teachings, which we will be talking about, but works to promote social justice and support others based on need, regardless of race or religion. And CRS on college campuses is more focused on advocacy here in the US. We've been a part of getting different bills passed and promoting the work that CRS does and overall advocate for the common good. So now we're going to turn it over to Kathy, who's going to begin us with a prayer.
Thank you, Holly. So I would like to invite everyone to take a second to kind of center yourselves and make yourself present to the space that you're in. And I will begin with the prayer. So, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and oh God, we take time to pause from daily work to gather our thoughts, to let our souls catch up with our bodies, to feel your presence in your creation, to ask forgiveness for our lapses, ours and on behalf of your people, and to be ourselves restored. Breathing in, God's Spirit calms my body. Breathing out, it's good to be alive. Lord Jesus Christ, we take time to gather around you. By your life and teaching, may we find our strength. And journeying together, may we find our rest. Breathing in, Christ lives in our lives. Breathing out, it's good to be alive. Holy Spirit, creative energy of love and compassion, life embracing, life transforming. Heal our bodies, heal our souls, heal our relationships, heal our nations. Breathing in, the spirit heals. Breathing out, it's good to be alive. Amen. I will now turn it over to Grace to introduce our first panelist.
Thanks, Kathy. Beautiful prayer. I am very excited to introduce Dr. Juan Chebly. He currently serves as the Strategic Partnerships Officer at the World Food Program within the United Nations. He has been at the UN since 2013, and he's also a visiting professor of economics at St. John's University, which is how I know him. He is my former professor of economics, made me actually like economics, so big credit to that. Really excited to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Grace. Wow, this is such an honor and a pleasure. I'll say an honor because it's not every day that a former student needs to hear more from you. So thank you, Grace. That's very kind. And it is a pleasure because, you know, certainly academia and spending time with young people wanting to change the world is truly a passion. So, you know, it's just a wonderful occasion as well because of the subject. You know, rarely in the United Nations context we get to talk about our faith, and as a devout Catholic, I mean, this is a I feel like a faith space, and that's just quite uncommon for me. So please indulge me. I mean, you know, my expertise is in economics and in the Sustainable Development Goals. So I will leave the philosophical and metaphysical to Dr. Scholz. But I certainly see the link, and I you know, everything I think that I've done in my professional life has certainly been inspired by my faith. And, you know, growing up in South America, certainly with such stark inequalities, I mean, you know, driving through the streets of Caracas, you will see wonderful, lush golf courses surrounded by what we call the barrios, you know, the very much low-income housing that rarely has potable water, electricity, and you know, these are things that mark me. You know, I certainly grew up thinking about this. Why is this? Why does this happen in the world? And what can we do about it? So, you know, I certainly, from my Catholic perspective, knew that something had to be done about that. Certainly, if you follow the gospel, you would know. But why we're in that situation, and how can we address this, you know, super complex issues the most efficient way, right? You know, having an economist mind, you always want to solve problems in the most efficient manner. So my journey started through academia, and then it you know, ended up in a global public policy. You know, when I joined the UN, we have been given a mandate to start looking at the next development agenda for the world. At the time, we had something called the Millennium Development Goals. For those of you who are not familiar with the Millennium Development Goals, here they are. 8. Let me know if you can see them. Yeah, okay, wonderful. So we had 8 goals and 15 years to achieve them. That was in the year 2000 when they were launched. So here we are with an agenda where most of the world, you know, 193 member states agreed to basically try and eradicate extreme poverty, at least by half by the year 2015. And the truth of the matter is that this exercise, unfortunately, was done sort of behind doors. It was not an inclusive process, if you will. So it was just very much a top-down approach on development. And even if the goals themselves were good goals, it took a lot of funding, a lot of effort to rally the world behind them. So, 2013, Secretary General says, well, we need to do things differently this time. We need to be smarter, and we need to have an agenda that is the most inclusive development agenda that the world has ever seen. These were the words of our Secretary General Ban Ki-moon at the time. So we knew that this agenda was built on human development, right? The capabilities approach, the work of Amartya Sen in the 90s. We understood that, certainly the freedom of the individual, human dignity, human rights. There were several links to the work of the UN since its inception in 1945, and of course the UN Charter. We, the peoples of the United Nations. Those are the first words of the UN Charter. Sound familiar? U.S. Constitution shares the same words. So it's about people, it's not about governments. So this time we went around the world and we polled over 10 million people. We organized over 100 national consultations, thematic consultations. We really sat down with the single mother in Kenya and asked her, what do you see as imperative for the world leaders to get behind so that we live in a better world by 2030? And so we listened to what people had to say in hoping that there would be ownership, there would be a unified vision as to what a better world was. And then backtrack ourselves and hopefully find a way to get there. I mean, this is the whole principle, the whole concept of backcasting. And we know it works. I mean, California has taken that approach in terms of their water management systems. But for us, it was really about convincing the world that this was a good idea. I mean, certainly we had to start at home. Even within the UN, you have a very technocratic approach. We're the experts, right? So why should we go out and consult? Well, this is exactly the message I brought. I was lucky enough, as a young data analyst at the UN to actually present the data to the UN system and the Secretary General himself. Curious anecdote. I mean, they gave me a pre-written speech, and I said, absolutely not. No way. If we're talking here about listening to people, then you ought to be able to. If you want me to speak, then you ought to be able to listen what I want to say. And it was a bit of chaos because it happened right before the briefing. But my message was simple. My message was to say, well, first of all, our assumptions might be wrong. And we really were. I mean, when we polled people living in dumpsters, homeless, we assumed that better jobs, better income, and healthcare would be top of the list. But it's actually education. You see, people understand that, again, this human development approach is key, and it includes certainly education for a better future. So we listened. And we showed the data. The second message that I wanted to share was that these were not just numbers. We were presenting the first million votes. It was just not numbers. I mean, we talk about, there's 272 million people who are acutely food insecure. So, what does that mean? These are families, children that go to bed hungry. So we wanted to present a human face to the data. Somewhat of a disconnect, of course, sometimes, sitting in New York versus what's happening in the rest of the world. But here we were in New York negotiating this agenda. And those were the messages that we brought. I think that we had an impact. I mean, the fact that we have 17 sustainable development goals and a new and inclusive agenda is testament to that. So for those of you who are not necessarily all too familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, here they are. So certainly very comprehensive. I would say that, I built, part of my doctoral research was based on, whether we went far enough and whether we harnessed the voice of people uh, in a legitimate way. So I think the only issue that didn't make it into the Sustainable Development Goals was the issue of nuclear disarmament. But there is an SDG, a Sustainable Development dedicated to peace, which is SDG 16. So I think it was pretty comprehensive. I think that if people didn't have a voice, people in New York used we had gathered to advance their objectives, their agendas. So this was all very positive, and it was very transparent. I would say it was a very transparent process. That in and of itself was successful. Major challenge: get the whole world to agree on a set of goals by a certain date. So that was massive. Now, when that work was finished, what then? How did we get there, right? As an economist, my first issue was how much would it cost? Because the criticism was there are too many, far too expensive. This is where it was coming out at the time. So I went to and I said, okay, well, let's look at the numbers. Okay, well, how much is it going to cost? How much? I'll give you an example. WFP right now, World Food Program, is asking for $5 billion to the world to be able to avert famine and address the food insecurity that has almost doubled because of the COVID crisis. That's $5 billion. But let's put it into perspective, right? Because normal people don't think in terms of billions. How much is it compared to, say, what we spend as a global society on military spending? It's just the percentage is, I mean, something like 374 times more what we're already spending on military and defense than it would take the whole world to end hunger, at least this year. So we know that it's totally possible. It's definitely achievable. It's just a matter of prioritizing. It's just a matter of political will. And and this is where rallying people, this is where involving people, it brings more accountability, more transparency, and ensures that these goals are actually achieved. Governments have committed to them, and it's really now up to each one of us to ensure that we are prioritizing them, that we're putting our money where our mouth is. And that's some of the work that I've been doing within the G20. Spent a lot of time working in the UN system to bring this type of messaging. And now this year we have a food system summit. So, the issue of food at the core of ending poverty and really transcending across the 17 SDGs. And the beauty of the agenda is that the agenda will not be a success for the world unless we achieve it for every country. And the whole logo of it, the whole slogan of the agenda is leave no one behind. So this is really what Catholic social thought is all about. It's about human dignity. And it's about the golden rule, right? And and all of these ideas, all of these concepts. Actually, if you only take a tour of the United Nations building, you'll see where a lot of that inspiration came from me. I spent a lot of time in that building, and some meetings are more interesting than others for sure. But within the UN system, the UN building here in New York, there is a wonderful piece of art by Norman. The artist is Norman Rockwell, and if you can see it in the screen, it's basically a homage to all of the religions of the world, represented, of course, by the peoples of the United Nations, with one very clear message: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Basically, the golden rule. We're very familiar with that message, right? So that got me thinking. Okay, well, what could I share? What possible wisdom could I bring to a group that is already doing so much good in the world, like you guys? Well, I thought that my experience in how I went in life in terms of having a call to work for others, to recognize dignity, to foster participation, right? To enshrine people's rights, to fight for the poor. I'm familiar protect the dignity of work, right? And all the wonderful things that Catholic social thought is all about, and ultimately also for sustainability, right? So that the human rights of those who haven't been born yet, right? The future generations are also protected. Hence the sustainable development agenda. So this message, I think, encompasses the spirit behind the Sustainable Development Goals, as it also encompasses, and it's at the core of Catholic social thought. I am not an expert, but I did my homework, and I went to the first document, Pope Leo the 13th, Rerum Novarum, 1891. Amazing, as an economist, the words, it's almost as reading Amartya Sen 100 years later. The Pope Leo 13 had already 100 years on Amartya Sen and human development. That made me think. Well, the SDGs, and I went to a friend, and I have to give him credit, permanent delegate to the United Nations for Caritas, a good friend. And hey, this opportunities come up, and what sort of wisdom would you have for me? And he said, Juan, sure, we have the SDGs, and we have to work together towards them. But before we had the SDGs, because the conversation of how do we get there, right? How do we get there? Before we had the SDGs, about 2,000 years before the SDGs, we had the Beatitudes. We had the Golden Rule. And that's really how we change the world, in my view. Living the gospel every day, loving thy neighbor. It's just as simple as that. Everything else, we can figure it out. It's sort of like a realization in light of what happened to the life of St. Thomas Aquinas. When he's written out hundreds of books, he said, "Oh, everything I wrote was just straw," because the answer is always been in front of all of us and inside of us. So with that, I think hopefully it's a good segue to Dr. Scholz, and I look forward to conversing further with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chebly. Poppy, would you like to introduce Dr. Scholz?
I would love to. Next, I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Sally Scholz, who is the professor and the chair of the philosophy department here at Villanova. I had the absolute joy of taking her class on Catholic social thought last semester, and I'm very, very excited to have her here with us today. So welcome, Dr. Scholz.
Thank you so much, and it's such a delight to be here with you all talking about these very important things. And I think we're actually at a really important moment in history to be thinking together about Catholic social thought and about the Sustainable Development Goals. We have an opportunity, and it's an opportunity to come out of the pandemic different, better, I think, as human beings, as a human family. Or we have the opportunity to continue along the same paths that we were going down, and where inequality continues to grow, and where we're plagued by what Catholic social thought might call the structures of sin, of racism and ageism, and all sorts of biases that affect our thinking. And so to take the time to reflect now, to see what we can do as individuals and as a people, I think, first of all, it's a unique opportunity. It's an opportunity that once we leave college, we don't get it as frequently, alas. And to do it together, I think, is really special, and to do it through dialogue as well is consistent with the teachings of Catholic social thought. And so we live our faith as we even enact this dialogue tonight. I thought that I would try to convince you that Catholic social thought is both more radical and more personal than the Sustainable Development Goals. And so I thought I'd walk you through some of the principles of Catholic social thought and some of its main components, doing a little bit to compare to some of the Sustainability Development Goals, but I'll leave most of those to Juan, my colleague. And to guide our path tonight, I pulled this quotation from Fratelli Tutti. Fratelli Tutti is the latest encyclical in the Catholic social tradition. As Juan mentioned, the Catholic social teaching begins with Rerum Novarum in 1891 and extends to Fratelli Tutti through a wide variety of issues and popes, obviously, always responding to the needs of the world. And so in Fratelli Tutti, we see the Pope actually frame the document in terms of viruses and looking at explicitly mentioning COVID, explicitly mentioning racial violence in the United States, or rather in the globe. In Rerum Novarum, the Pope Leo XIII is addressing workers and the rights of workers. Throughout the years, the popes have always used the gospel message to address what is actually happening in the world. And they took the world's largest stage to call out, to say, these are the structures of sin, and here's why they are sinful and how we can act to change them. That ends up being that tripartite sort of rallying call, if you will, that is so commonly heard when people talk about Catholic social thought of see, judge, act. Now that's a rallying call that I think inspires a lot of us. We see the problems in the world, and the Sustainability Development Goals are one way of identifying those. In 2015, these 193 nations of the world come together to identify what is wrong and how we can have a multi-pronged approach to addressing some of the ills. Now, as Juan mentioned in his comments, he said the goal was to assess why we're in the situation and how we can address in the most efficient way. That's the economics approach. Catholic social thought takes a much different approach, and that's part of what I want to bring out tonight. It is an approach that is in some ways very patient and impatient at the same time. It's impatient because it's a constant call. It's a call that we need to act now. But it's patient in that we recognize that the change is going to be gradual and slow. And the sustainability goals, I believe, Juan can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they set a 15-year goal, which is a tremendously ambitious goal to achieve what needs to be achieved in the world. All right, so let's take a look at this quotation. You've probably by now had the opportunity to read it while I talked at you, so I appreciate that. In the first line, I'll note that the Pope calls out monochrome economic approaches. What he's doing there is that C in the See, Judge, Act. He's looking at the world and seeing problems in the world, but also seeing problems with how the world addresses those problems in the world. All too often, we take a technocratic approach. We look for one solution to fit a single problem. Part of what makes Catholic social thought so much more radical, as I said earlier, is that it looks at how things are woven together and how, for instance, economic inequality affects the ability to achieve an education, or rather, or maybe not rather, but in addition, how one feels about oneself and how that feeling about oneself is then going to impact violence in the world, and so on and so forth, right? So all of the different issues are interwoven together. Now, I actually think that's implied in the Sustainable Development Goals as well, that there is this interconnection. But Catholic social thought makes it explicit. All right, so there's one difference. Now, another difference is that the Catholic social thought is looking for the underlying problems of the issues that we face in the world, or the structures of sin. In looking for those underlying problems, we take, as Professor Chebly mentioned, a more philosophical approach, and we look at such things, some ideologies that infect our way of interacting in the world, that affect our relationships. So things like individualism, right? An obsessive individualism that absorbs all of our energy into ourselves, makes us unable and unwilling to see the needs of another. And so we need to address that. We need to see individualism for what it is. It is contributing to the structures of sin. Isolation. And you know, God bless the ability to communicate. And we are, in many ways, as the Pope said in Fratelli Tutti, we are more connected than ever. And yet we are more isolated than ever. And the pandemic has really brought that out. So although we all have our phones and we love to reach out to friends through our Twitter accounts and our tweets and our, what's the other thing, texts, we are nevertheless so much more isolated and lonely as well. So that too is, so individualism, isolation, those are just two of the things that might be problems that undergird or underlie other problems of that we see sort of more on the surface. Two others that I'll just mention are both capitalism and communism. And the early documents of Catholic social teaching really focused on this tension between communism and capitalism. Both were ideologies pulling people in opposite directions. And notice what each does in different ways. They encourage us as humans to focus on the objects of our social relations, the money, the transactions, the exchanges, rather than what should be the proper subjects of our human relations, and that is human beings and human relationships. So any ideology that pulls us away from our human relationships is going to be problematic. I've just mentioned 4, but I'm sure you can come up with many others, and I'd be delighted to chat with you more about that if time allows. So it offers, in other words, a sort of ideological analysis and an ideological critique of contemporary culture. Whatever that contemporary culture is, spanning the last 130 years. And by the way, I'll just put in a plug there. We are at the 130th anniversary, right, of Rerum Novarum. So that's a monumental date in itself. And finally, I'll mention one last thing, and that is that Catholic social thought offers a critique of technocratic approaches. And technocratic approaches are that single problem, single solution type of approach. It's when we sort of over-engineer a problem and we fail to employ the aspects of our humanity that allow us to see things as connected. So if we try to isolate problems, we don't see all of the different connections. What today many philosophers talk of as intersectionality is actually present in Catholic social thought. Okay, having said that, I'll also say that Catholic social thought has been woefully silent on issues of race until the last 20 years or so. So that's another area that we can talk about more if you wish. All right, now I've highlighted another quotation from the long quotation. I'm using the same quotation throughout. I'm just walking us through it all. So the next passage is about these popular movements that unite unemployed, temporary and informal workers, and many others who do not easily find a place in existing structures. Notice the emphasis on work. Work is a central category for Catholic social thought, and workers are primary. But work means something different than it does within a capitalist system or even in a communist system. Work is not just something that one performs for sustenance or for an exchange of money. And in fact, work really shouldn't be reduced to an exchange. Instead, work is that which I contribute to the community, or one contributes to a community, and it's part of how I flourish as a human being. Right? In contributing to the community, I am enacting the very reason God created me as a unique human being. Each of us is a unique human being with this ability to contribute in important ways. And we do that contribution through work. By work, we don't just mean remunerated work. We also mean all the things that we do when we contribute to community. So work is a much more expansive term in Catholic social thought than we find in some economic accounts. It as I said, entails that contributions to the community and the ways in which we live out our unique humanness in a flourishing manner. Notice too that the Pope connects various popular movements So there's a real emphasis on participating in our own communities there. All right, let me jump to the next one. And here we can begin to see the judge portion, right? We saw the see, we see problems in our world, we see needs for change and opportunities. We also see problems with how we, some approaches can oversimplify problems and fail to see the problem appropriately. We then need to turn to the judge, and the judge sounds, in our contemporary uses of the word judge, it's often has a negative connotation. And that's not at all what Catholic social teaching means. It means to look in our hearts and discern what's wrong. What's wrong? What's gone wrong in our human relationships, and how can we ameliorate them? So this is just one approach to it. What is needed is a model of social, political, and economic participation that can include popular movements and invigorate local, national, and international governing structures. Now, the quotation in there I'll mention is the Pope citing himself, citing a previous speech. So, it's still one Pope. But what we see in this quotation too is the call to be involved, the call to also be involved and see ourselves at multiple levels. We are citizens of a nation, but we are also members of a family, and we are members of a community, the Villanova community or the St. John's community. And in each of these, and we are members of the international community. In each of these places, we take up a role, and it's incumbent upon us to respond to that role. The governing structures is also worth mentioning because it taps into a key principle of Catholic social thought, and that is subsidiarity. The principle of subsidiarity means that decisions ought to be made at the lowest possible level where there is enough requisite information. And so a family can make decisions that affect that family, but needs the support of higher organizations. A state ought not to be entering into the decisions of the family. A state ought not to determine what school the children go to. But a state might determine that we need to support the family in their efforts to send their children to school. So I think you see that actually in play in the sustainability, the same sustainable development goals as well. You can see an emphasis on supporting families. You can see also an emphasis in Juan's presentation in how the information is collected. We want not just national level data, nor do we want just community level data. We want to hear from the voices of the people, right? Because that information is valuable. And that's really part of what this is, the principle of subsidiarity means, is to say that communities are valuable. There is leadership within communities at all level. We need to let that leadership work and support each other. So the state doesn't enter into the local, and the local doesn't enter into the state unless there is need for that. Also emphasizes the need for participation and dialogue, which I mentioned earlier. And the Pope then calls for a torrent of moral energy that springs from including the excluded in the building of a common destiny. I love this line. It's so beautifully written, a torrent of moral energy. Notice that what's called for then is a moral response, not just an economic response. But in fact, the economic, the political are subsumed within the moral, so such that our moral decision-making is, or rather our economic decision-making is influenced by our moral commitments. That too, I think, is present in the SDGs, but I think that the Catholic social thought pushes it a little bit further by using the common good, human dignity, and solidarity in a unique way. So let me mention the common good and that common destiny there. We are given this planet by God to use for the good of all. And that is part of what the common good means. We are one human community or one human family, according to Catholic social thought. in sharing the same destiny, we are united and interdependent in a way that is not always recognized in secular culture. So the fact is that when any one of us sins, then the others are impacted. And so because we are interdependent in that way, when one of us seeks to address injustice, then we are all also implicated in that addressing of injustice. We are one human community. Notice that in turning it into a moral approach rather than a solely economic or solely political, we also keep the human centered. And I would say Catholic social thought always keeps the individual human as the central focus. So any economic project, any political project must be adjudicated on the basis of how each individual is impacted. Now, it's not always something you can measure in terms of data. And that's what makes Catholic social thought a little more patient. Because what we see is instead of for instance, a gradual or rather an efficient reduction in inequality, we are seeking instead a radical valuing of each human person. Okay, so in some effects they are the same, and they certainly overlap. But Catholic social thought, in keeping that human-centered focus, sees the efforts to alleviate inequality or to address inequality as serving the human person, such that no single human person is left behind. I guess I'll say that, I'll leave that. And I think I'm just about out of time, and I'm just near the end of my slides here too. So finally, you've heard the Pope call for solidarity. These experiences of solidarity which grow up from below, right? Solidarity is a sort of groundswell, and it includes everything. Solidarity is interpreted as one human family, but it's also the moral side of our empirical fact of interdependence. So the fact that we are connected and that the wealth in one nation affects the poverty in another and vice versa, or the wealth in one person affects the poverty of another within the same society. Those are part of our human interdependence, and the moral side of that, or the virtuous response, is solidarity. Solidarity then is a descriptive analysis of what we currently are, one human family, but it's also an aspiration, saying that as one human family, we need to address the needs of each member. And it's acknowledging that connection, but acknowledging also that we have failed insofar as our brothers and sisters are suffering. So we are responsible for our brothers and sisters, and we are responsible for their vulnerability, both a responsibility to meet the needs and a responsibility to address the conditions that cause that need to begin with. We do this through millions of actions, great and small, right? Millions of actions, great and small. And this is one of the things I love about Catholic social thought, because it sees that the actions of a national leader like Joe Biden, who, by the way, is inspired by Catholic social thought in his own political decision making, his actions are richly important, but so are mine. So are mine in choosing to buy fair trade coffee, and in choosing to love my neighbor, in choosing to give time to the poor, or to listen to the lonely, right? All of those small ways are part of a big way as well. So each small actions are powerful. And I think that's a really important thing for each of us, especially when we're busy with, econ exams and philosophy exams and accounting and everything else. It's important to realize that we have power even in our day-to-day interactions. And we are creatively intertwined, right? The creatively intertwining of everything is a beautiful image that takes, again, that tripartite see, judge, act, and it reminds me that a new version of that three-part division is conversion, communion, and solidarity. We have to look inside and come together in community in order to be able to appropriately address the needs of others and to address the conditions or fix the conditions that created the structures of sin to begin with. We are, in other words, sowers of change, each one of us, intertwined like the words of a poem. And I will stop there.
Thank you so much to both of our panelists. So many wonderful, wonderful notes and intersections of ideas. We do want to give about 10 or 15 minutes to the panelists to respond to each other, build off of each other's points and just talk about anything they found interesting, ask any questions. And then we will go into a short reflection and a question and answer piece.
I don't know if that's my cue, Grace, but I'll jump in. Not that I would dare debate a philosopher, because certainly I'm wise enough not to do that. But no, I mean, no truth. I think, and then seriously speaking, I think more than a just that position, I think that you've summarized it very well. I think that there are linkages, and of course, this is a public policy, a global public policy, an aspirational agenda that certainly governments are subscribing to, right? And but ultimately, I think the issues, the issues that Catholic social thought bring is just is about people, right? And the human dignity really rooted on the fact that we all have a little piece of God within us. So and I think, but certainly that also ought to be able to drive the way we approach public policy, whether it's economics, whether it's public health care, and I think that certainly the interesting and the important thing about the Sustainable Development Goals is that it is comprehensive. There is that notion that you can't fix the economy unless you address social issues, and you cannot guarantee prosperity in the long run unless you are really a shepherd of the environment, right? So of course, all of this is not new. We've heard from variety of people within Catholic social thought, different popes, that this is the approach that we ought to take. It's not, especially when we talk about our dominion over Earth, the dominion, the literal translation from whatever it was, the ancient Greek and biblical text to, what it really means is shepherding. So those concepts, I think, are truly, truly interesting. But I mean, the thing that really sticks the most from me, to me, I have to admit, I've learned a lot today. So I have to thank you and thank Dr. Scholz, because wow, that's really enlightening. But the thing that stuck the most with me is this whole concept of human dignity, interconnectedness, and surely, how do we exercise? How do we practice that? In solidarity. For me, as a policymaker, of course, it has to do with helping governments create frameworks that facilitate the individual action, because the individual action will only get us so far. Certainly, I mean, I buy my electricity from renewable energy, but the issue right now, and I choose to buy fair trade, but if we're spending billions of dollars, more than on subsidizing fossil fuels, a lot more than we spend on subsidizing renewable energy for it. Just to give you one example, I mentioned military spending before. Here's another one: fossil fuel subsidies. It's really like swimming against the current, right? So sure, change starts within, but we also have to work together, come together as a society, and beyond the Catholic religion, we have to work as a global community, because we're facing unprecedented global challenges. The pandemic is one of them. Climate change, if not the most existential one, certainly nuclear war, that's certainly one that keeps me up at night. So these are global challenges, no simple solution, no local solution. It's only a concerted solution. But hey, that doesn't mean that the UN is going to come into your home and tell you how to live. And you see, there's a lot of misconception, a lot of fake news, unfortunately. I wanted to address this as well, because the Sustainable Development Goals are not some sort of secret Malthusian scheme to reduce global population. It's not anything like that. As a matter of fact, it's an aspirational agenda. What does that mean? It means that the subsidiarity principle is at the core of it, meaning governments implement the agenda the way they see best. So they design policy frameworks, even financing frameworks, to ensure that the goals are attained in the best way that they see possible and feasible. So you see, there is an interrelationship between those philosophical underlying principles of Catholic social thought. It took us 2,000 years to somewhat come close. But I think we're getting there. I mean, and I am an optimist at heart. I think it's too late, in the words of the French filmmaker Jean-Arthur Bertrand, it's too late to be pessimistic. So the way I see it is, does legality supersede morality, or the other way around? Does economic efficiency supersede morality, or the other way around? Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, you will know that an immoral economic policy is probably not very sustainable in the future, meaning people will revolt against it. The whole point that Pope Leo XIII was making was that workers were being exploited, meaning free trade, uncontrolled markets create externalities, negative externalities, exploitation of workers, and so on. So we know this. The concept of externality, it's been around. We usually focus a lot on negative externality side of things, pollution, social workers' exploitation would be one of them. We don't necessarily focus so much on measuring the positive externalities of economic activity, meaning why are we not counting, for example, work at the household, childcare, for example? Why isn't that measured as part of GDP? I mean, why? But you see, these are arbitrary systems that have been set up. And certainly we have to change them, and that's really policymaking, what policymaking aims to do. But it doesn't happen overnight. Hopefully, the pandemic is a juncture that allows us to bring and accelerate that structural change. But structural change takes time. But that's what we need. That's what we need if we're to have the frameworks and the lay systems that make it a little easier for us as a global society to get along. So I hope I've answered, and hopefully it sparked a bit of conversation, but I am truly just very thankful for just learning so much today with you. Over.
Well, that was a beautiful response. Thank you for that. And I would say, my one of the chief criticisms that I constantly face in myself in thinking about Catholic social thought and in teaching it, and Kathy, you'll remember this came up every day in class, is it lacks a sort of concreteness, right? It gives us this moral direction, but they demur from the popes demur from giving policy, and they demur from laying down any direct shoulds, right? You should do this. Instead, they invite us to think ourselves, right? And they invite us to see the principles active in our lives and to prioritize certain things like work, like family, like community, and like human dignity. That does make it difficult, right? It makes it difficult to operationalize, and it also makes it opens it up to a wide variety of interpretations, and you get people even within the church who disagree on interpretations of Catholic social thought.
What I do,
and that's something we have to be okay with, I guess.
true.
It's so interesting because everyone's muted, but I hear talking. But at any rate, nevertheless, and the other part, of course, is that you rightly mentioned is that the Catholic social thought, it is since Pope John the 23rd, has been addressed to all people of goodwill, but there's just no doubt that the Catholic Church has lost a lot of its moral authority, especially in light of the sexual abuse crisis, right, scandal that has rocked the church. So its moral status has fallen a great deal, but in using, it is the largest international corporation in some sense, right? And or at least when John the 23rd was writing, it was not John the 23rd, sorry, Leo the 13th was writing, it was the largest world corporation. It is a global corporation. So it does have a certain power in its voice. And I think its greatest strength is strength in reflection. But I completely agree with you in terms of sustainability development goals. Those are, they're policy oriented. They to get so many nations in the world to agree on them is just a phenomenal thing, right? And in fact, in order to accomplish that, you cannot have the ideological background that Catholic social teaching has, right? Or the philosophical background. You need to negotiate the particulars without having the metaphysical backing. And that this was accomplished is phenomenal. If the goals are met by 2032, we should see a very different world. And that's important. The other thing I'll mention is that the Sustainability Development Goals do something else that Catholic social thought has been less good at, and that is talk about things like AIDS and HIV and women and the role of women in equality in the culture. So all very valuable insights from the SDG.
Thank you so much, panelists, for responding to each other. Give me 1 second, I'll pull up this PowerPoint quick. We'll get into a little reflection, and then we'll go into a Q&A. Okay, so I mean, Dr. Scholz, that was a perfect transition into our reflection. You said, reflection is one of the ways, and it was one of the best ways we can practice these things. And in CRS, we completely agree. We try to, in most of our events or presentations, have a small reflection piece. So we came up with some questions, and if anyone feels, I'll read them, and then if anyone feels called towards anyone, it doesn't have to be a panelist, it could be anyone here. We want you to get involved, or at least just reflect for yourself on some of these questions. So I'll read the first few, and then I'll let Kathy take the other ones. So how did the UN's process of formulating sustainable development goals reflect the values expressed in the Catholic social teachings? What are the ways in which we can contribute to the further developments of the Sustainable Development Goals in our own lives? And do the connections between these two concepts change your perspective in any way about your faith to the public sphere?
What sort of political, economic, or well-being impact might there be from what we achieve through the Sustainable Development Goals? And where else is this model of integral human development found? I would add to as well, if anyone feels called to even share their reflection in the chat instead of unmuting yourself, you're also welcome to do that.
I think the panelists mentioned this, but for the first one, one of the major connections I see between the Sustainable Development Goals and the Catholic social teachings, and I think both panelists touched on this a bit, is just the emphasis on participation. And I think that's so important. Participation is so important for the common good, to be in solidarity with one another, and to listen to people's needs from those people themselves, instead of maybe assuming their needs, or giving maybe what we think is best, which is kind of historical development failures. So I mean, it's really cool to see. I think that when we think of the UN, it's like this, at least for me, I think of it as kind of this big thing that's maybe very separate from me, a lot bigger than I am, but they're carrying out ideas that are from people on the ground who are really experiencing, issues of injustice, or climate change, or other sociopolitical issues.
Yeah, Grace, I certainly agree with you. I mean, I think it's at the core of good policymaking, participation. Because, and the reason, very, very specifically, participation and side to side with inclusion. Because what we had in the past was inclusion in thinking, well, when I'm drafting policy, I'm thinking of everyone. I'm thinking of I mentioned the example of a single mother in Kenya, which is a very touching story that came behind all of that data. But it's not enough to think about people. We have to hear from them firsthand. And I mentioned Amartya Sen before. Amartya Sen said that people are not mere recipients, passive clients of public policy, but the very instruments that bring policy into life. And that's very much linked back to dignity, the concept of agency, freedom to realize our dreams and our aspirations as a way of giving glory. So is the main concept behind the theory of collective wisdom. It's not our intellect, but our dignity that really brings that to the fore. If you were to ask, if you were to ask me, it just feels right that we need to listen.
Like, actually, what you said reminded me of a quote. I don't remember where I heard it, but I think it's like, decisions are made by those who show up. But sometimes, there isn't a place at the table for certain people or populations, or for people to be represented, genuinely and accurately in the ways that they want to be represented. So, I think it's really great that something that's really core to both of these, to both the SDGs and the CSTs, is just getting, to hear what people really need from themselves. It's just awesome. Does anyone else?
Also, the fact that we can only achieve all of these goals if we can do it together. I think the togetherness aspect, the solidarity aspect of it is also key. No single nation, no single government, continent will get there unless we all get there. And I think this is also very much true for the pandemic we're living. So the concept of solidarity and the whole moral principles that we're called to follow, it's not just the right thing, but it's ultimately the only way to have a better world. I mean, it just makes sense, even from a selfish perspective, if you think about it. I'll give you one example and I'll stop. As an economist, you cannot have economic efficiency if you don't have economic inclusion. It just makes no sense, and this has been proven over and over. Stiglitz, our own Father Primo, St. John's University, wrote extensively on this. And we have other authors that have expanded on the relationship between good outcomes and some of these so-called moral principles. But when you understand through evidence that they are necessary to to achieve those very outcomes, and they are part of good economics, and that's it. I mean, I hope that at some point we will stop calling green businesses green business. We'll just call them businesses. But these are the transitions we were speaking about before. But yeah, looking forward to hearing from folks.
Yeah, I was going just to share quickly. I would echo a lot of the what the comments that have been shared so far, and I would say like I agree. I hope that one day that we don't have to say green businesses anymore. We can just say businesses, and I think it's very interesting to see like how with these two, the Catholic social teachings and sustainable development goals, like the emphasis on being able to provide conditions for the, I guess, the flourishing of the human person is central to building a better future for all of us. So I thank you both for that. Yeah, just it's been a value that's been very personal to my life, but to see how it is and should be important in the public sphere, I think it's I don't know, it's a very good realization for me, or good reminder.
May I address the last question briefly? So I thought that was a really challenging question. The where else is this model of integral human development found? And it sent me thinking. And I would say that it's important for us to remember that although we are animated by our Catholic faith, and that's why we're part of CRS or work on Catholic social thought. Every major world religion holds the dignity of the human person as central. And I think it's just really important that we see ourselves not as I'm tempted to say that we see ourselves not as special in that way, but we see instead ourselves as connected to all others in that way. And you know, the SDGs weren't perhaps motivated by any sort of religious commitment, but we could say alternatively that they're motivated by every religious commitment, right? They unite in many ways, and they are developed through a process of negotiation that honors the contributions that come from a variety of different cultures and nations. And the other part of that is that in recognizing the value of human dignity within faith traditions, we also kind of we're forced to recognize the ways we failed. And that's one of the things that I appreciate about the sustainable development goals, is that they articulate the problems. They articulate in clear, concise snapshot form, and it's dramatic. It's dramatic, the inequality, the lack of access to food, the food wastage that we experience. What did it say? 1.3 billion tons of food wasted, and I know I'm part of that. And so even as I see the need to ensure the human rights to equality, to participation, to economic security and food security, I also have to recognize the duties, and that too is a concept that comes from Catholic social thought. It always pairs rights and duties. There are duties not to waste food, to ensure that other people have food security, and so on and so forth. And that is something we see in every faith tradition as well, right? Take care of the human person, and that's not just a sort of negative obligation to protect their liberties, or their rights, it actually requires that we work. It involves a positive investment from each of us to all others.
I just want to quickly share real quick, but I love what you said, Dr. Scholz. I'm taking philosophy now, and I feel like we're going through kind of all the philosophers like Aristotle, Marx, whatever. And some of them we kind of debate about human dignity and whether it's even a thing. And that's one thing I do love about Catholicism and like the Catholic social teachings is that they are reaffirmed in that the goodness of humanity and that everyone has dignity and has a value. But yeah, so thank you for sharing.
Thank you, everyone, for your reflections. You can continue to reflect on those ideas, and hopefully, be thinking about these in the future. Now, really quick, we're just going to introduce a little action piece, and we'll go into some questions. We just want to make sure that this gets covered. Holly, did you want to talk about Rice Bowl?
Yeah. So Rice Bowl is a CRS campaign that allows people to put their faith into action during Lent and practice almsgiving. So it raises money to support people all over the world. 75% of donations go to support humanitarian programs around the world, and the other 25% goes towards hunger and poverty alleviation efforts in the United States. In the first 40 years of the Rice Bowl, over $250 million was raised to go towards this. So it's actually so amazing. And so we just want to encourage you guys, if anyone feels inclined, to also donate. And we have both our St. John's and Villanova Venmos right there. And we also just want to encourage you to follow us on Instagram, so see more upcoming events and look at what we're doing in the future.
Thanks, Holly. And I'll just introduce this piece, and if Dr. Chebly wants to jump in at any point, because I know this is his campaign. So Dr. Chebly has done some research and is a part of this Give Me 5 campaign that I learned about when I was in his class, so I wanted to share it with all of you. And this is the Advocate Pledge, but Give Me 5 is essentially the idea that if the world's major governments or everyone involved in the UN gave up 5% of what they spent on global defense spending, then we could achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. So that's, that it brings in a lot of pieces that we're talking about today about how working together, that our fates are intertwined and we need to take care of each other. So this is just spreading that message. So here, if you go over the QR code, it'll take you to the Give Me 5 pledge and the website. And then we have a few questions, I think, that were submitted. And then if anyone else wants to put any questions in the chat or unmute. Sorry, I'm getting to... Sorry, I'm just trying to pull up the Q&A. Stop sharing. All right. So we have one question for Dr. Scholz. Could you speak more about the idea of technocracy and how it relates to the term intersectionality?
Okay, good. So technocracy doesn't relate to intersectionality, actually. I was sort of juxtaposing those. The technocratic paradigm is a paradigm that Pope Francis, he uses that term, and he uses it in Laudato Si and also in this Fratelli Tutti, the latest encyclical, as a way to critique certain ways of approaching problems. And a technocratic paradigm is that, I think I used the example of a single problem, a single solution, and it tries to sort of engineer solutions without looking at the implications, without looking at enough perhaps at the why we have the problem, and then also what will happen when I achieve this solution. So an example might be from development. In the past, for instance, the US has, Juan probably knows a lot more about this than I do, so I'm stepping on thin ice here, but maybe he can help me out. But the US, for instance, gave a whole bunch of rice exports to Haiti. Well, it undercut Haitian rice farmers, and oh, you know what? I've got the wrong thing. It's sugar. A whole bunch of sugar, and so all these Haitian sugar farmers were kind of driven out of business because they couldn't afford to grow their own sugar anymore because it was U.S. subsidized sugar, and the farmers in the U.S. were being subsidized as well. Have I got that somewhat close, Juan? Is that?
Well, I was thinking of the issue of cholera, and how it's brought by the peacekeepers. But I guess you're right. I mean, it has happened. That's another example.
Yes. Okay. Good. Good. And each it's a good example, right? But in either case, what you've got is a problem of hunger, and a solution that's sort of pouring resources in, but neither is really looking at the reasons for why the hunger exists, and or the implications of our solution. That's the sort of technocratic paradigm. It's using a sort of a technological response, and by here technological, you want to think in the broad understanding of technological to solve a problem. But you can also take it a little more literally and say, even just look at our own lives and say, well, look, we had this problem of telephones being tied to our homes, and we weren't always home, and so we missed calls, and so we created a digital device, and how did that affect us? We didn't think through how that technology would impact the rest of our human relations. We just thought this is the greatest thing ever. And I could say the same thing about email, and on and on. It's using this technological approach without thinking about humans enough. Instead, we need a human-based approach. Now, the intersectionality piece comes in because Catholic social thought asks us to look at the human person in their situation, right? In their families, in their communities. Much like how Juan described talking with actual people on the ground. In order to do that, we have to see all of the various things that impact their lives. We have to look at the ways various forms of oppression or injustices intersect in their lives and affect how they experience, for instance, access to education. We can't see that if we don't understand the individual in their context fully. So that's what I meant by connecting the individual. So it's actually juxtaposed to opposite with the technocratic. But as I said very quickly when I brought this up, the church itself is at fault for not dealing with race directly enough and often enough, and of course has now acknowledged its own role in upholding racial divisions globally, and of course some parts of the church supported the slave trade. Some parts of the church have been involved in the brutal murder of indigenous people through colonization. So the church has its own history of sin that it is gradually addressing. But it's coming to it. That's part of being human too, is to recognize our fallibility, to recognize our own limitations and our own sinfulness, and to own it, and to seek the conversion, seek the change of heart that would allow us to say, I did this, I did X, it's wrong. I now need to do everything I can to make sure it doesn't happen again and no one else does it again either, right? So I hope that addresses the question a bit.
I think that was great. Yeah, I think that was a great answer. Another question, this is for either or both panelists. Can panelists talk about the relationship between climate change and sociopolitical injustices experienced around the world?
I was still reminiscing of the on the last question, because I think, you know, these are deep questions. So sure, it's been a long day, but let's take a hack at it. I think the most important issue in terms of climate change and social justice has to do with who has been emitting CO2 for how long and who's bearing the impact. You know, not to oversimplify, not to be a technocrat, but you know, I think that the issue, and we've been over and over this issue when we address multidisciplinary policymaking, and you know, it says, you know, the technical and the expertise as silos. Maybe Dr. Scholz can speak about how our society is organized in that way. I think it has something to do with Aristotle. I hope I'm remembering my philosophy right. But in any case, this whole idea that, you know, we have to become experts and dive into the expertise, we sort of forget the integral as the holistic aspect of it. Hey, healthcare is a great example in this country, right? And so the holistic aspect of it is not destroying the specialists and the silos. It's really being able to communicate across. So how do we get there? And I think, you know, Catholic social thought, I mean, our own religions, you know, they all call us to be humble. And humility, of course, you know, it's been said to be the crystal bridge that leads us to heaven. Venezuelan servant of God said that. Humility, to know that we don't have all the answers. We need to talk to doctors, we need to talk to philosophers, we need to talk to everyone. We need to collaborate. But I think that doesn't necessarily mean that we get away, we destroy the scientific method. No, we actually need it more than ever. We have to look back and see where it went wrong, what is the data telling us, and how do we fix it? But not just one person, because obviously the problems are way too complex. But we need everybody. We need everybody to come and tell us. And I mean, when I say everybody, you can well define it as stakeholders in any given particular public policy issue. And it is so much so a necessity of addressing problems in an efficient way that it is part of due diligence. You know, that's how you design a good development project. You have to have proper consultation. And when we consulted the world on climate change, the Climate Paris Accord, again, consultations upon consultations. And it was not, I mean, I think on the climate issue, we had a great precedent, which was the Montreal Protocol. The Montreal Protocol was the very reason why we are not all suffering from skin cancer. It was the protocol that allowed the world to face off the CFCs, I believe, that were damaging the ozone layer. 190 plus nations of the world came together, understood the problem. Science told us we found a way. Substitute that particular chemical for one that is not as harmful. So we, you know, and with the Paris Agreement, we've understood that the culprit is CO2. I mean, you know, global warming, CO2, the cause is CO2, the culprit global warming. And so we know what needs to be done. We also know historically who bears a greater responsibility, let's say, and who also is suffering a higher impact from the consequences. And unfortunately, it's also have less means. Hey, talk about an option for the poor. Climate change is going to affect people who with less resources. You don't have to be, you know, a climate expert to know that. You know, if you have the means to move, you move. But those who don't, their entire country might flood. You know, this is a reality for small island states like the Maldives. We face a transcendental justice issue that transcends borders. And here's where the United Nations as a space for communication collaboration can be very, very helpful, but it has to come from a position of humility. And I think that was the approach of the Secretary General when he said, we have to lead the world. It was also the smart thing to do, if you ask me. But it starts from knowing that you don't have all the answers.
Thanks, Dr. Chebly. Did you want to respond at all, Dr. Scholz?
Could you read the question one more time for me?
Of course, yeah. Can you talk about the relationship between climate change and the socio-political injustices experienced globally?
Wow.
A big question, yes.
That's a great question. So I'm gonna answer no. I can't talk about that. So no, I'm just kidding you. But let me throw out one thing that that Pope Francis says in Laudato Si, which is his encyclical on climate change, and that is he says, look, one of the greatest challenges is consumer culture. And if you think about how consumer culture is a sort of a single thing that undergirds a whole lot of other things, you can start to see a lot about Catholic social thought and a lot about the problems affecting the globe for climate change. And so, yeah, I mean, here's our opportunity to reflect on what we spend our money on, how we spend our money, how our spending is different from spending the world over, for instance, and what waste is accompanied with our spending, right? Do we have more clothes than we need? Do we have more food than we need? Do we buy things in lots of plastic containers and lots of bits of plastic and lots of single-use plastics, and how much energy goes into creating the products that we take for our entertainment and our pleasure, and on and on. So I'll just throw out consumer culture as one of those linchpins that connects then the social and political and climate change. So I hope the questioner might take that as acceptable.
Yes, there are many possible answers, I think. So no, I think you both did great jobs of answering that. Did you have a question? I saw someone had a hand up. I'm sure.
Looks like Dan does.
Dan?
Hi, yes, Dan Griffin. I'm the facilitator for the CRS Global Ambassadors here at Villanova. Dr. Juan, a quick question. When you mentioned the Caritas insight that you got from this, did that happen to be Joe Donnelly with Caritas Internationalis?
Well, that's it. You read my mind. That was Joe Donnelly. I didn't want to put him into the forelight, given that he's just retired, but that was him.
No, I bring him up because I think the Caritas Network is an excellent example of the integration of some of these principles, the idea of integral human development that's particularly practiced by Catholic Relief Services, because I feel strongly that Catholic social teaching and the SDGs share the beauty of this complete integration. There isn't one SDG that's more important than the other. There isn't one principle of Catholic social teaching that outweighs the others. They're all inherently woven into their application, but that also indicates, I think, a shared challenge, and that would be, as Dr. Scholz was talking about, the lack of sometimes the specificity in Catholic social teaching. There's the idea of the accountability. So could you say more about the monitoring and evaluation of the SDGs and some of those challenges? And also this idea of accountability of the Catholic social teaching. How do you measure solidarity? How do you benchmark subsidiarity?
Thank you, Dan. And if I may, building up on you bringing Joe Donnelly, he was a part of when we were doing these consultations around the world. Caritas was represented. The humanitarian, what you would think, they were a part of the steering group, and you know, they were the board. If I was any sort of CEO equivalent figure as I was leading that effort, he was part of the board. And you know, in the same board, we had Caritas, we had the feminist movement, we had the youth movement, we had, you know, the elders. We had, imagine trying to bring consensus amongst that type of diversity. But that in essence, you know, it was the common vision. And you know, I think oftentimes it is the common ground. Uh, we have a lot more of it than we really think. With the Sustainable Development Goals, and that brings accountability of the agenda itself, because you know there were many issues that easily could have slipped the final declaration. One of them, for example, was honest government. On the My World survey, an honest and responsive government was very, very high. It was on the top 5 in many places. And so we knew that for governments negotiating this agenda, that some of them were going to be pushing back, and they did. But the evidence was there. There was no denying. Goal 5, SDG 5, gender equality. You know, it was with the excuse that it could have been mainstreamed across they wanted, you know, some people wanted to get rid of it. I mean, some member states. But the evidence was so women were so active, and they had all of the evidence that we prepared graphs and, you know, visualizations that showed, well, look, women are at a disadvantage. So it is an issue and needs to be at the forefront. So as to not be hidden. So I think the accountability on the design of the agenda happened because of inclusion and participation. But then when it came to come up with the indicators and the targets, so the agenda has 17 goals. It has 169 targets and 247 indicators. So, you know, and the issue we have now is that National Statistics Office around the world don't have the capability to measure those 247. As a matter of fact, some of them have never been measured. I mean, how do you measure good governance? I mean, we have some references, but you know, and so you know there are challenges. And at the World Food Program, one of the things that we are pioneering is, since we have beneficiaries that we serve with humanitarian aid, we actually have a lot of information about them. We have been helping governments to help them craft social protection policies in the midst of the pandemic that are very efficient in targeting those who really need the help the most urgent. Because remember, a lot of people are not necessarily connected. You know, it's very hard if you're not registered. You know, if you don't have good registries, how do you target people? The informal economy is also a big challenge. And a lot of the suffering was actually happening in urban areas, whereas a lot of the focus was on the rural areas. So this is what we're doing, using data, the latest technology, to ensure that we know whether or not we're moving towards progress, and we identify those who are most in need so that they're not left behind.
Was that to me too? There are no tools for accountability in Catholic social thought, or no measurable tools, so far as I would argue. But I will say, you know, in the gospel, Jesus says that the poor you will always have with you, and one of the things that well, I'm going to give it to Pope John Paul II does is it expands the notion of poverty. It's not just economic poverty; it's also the poverty of loneliness, and a wide variety of other poverties as well. I guess I would say, look, we can measure it in our own lives when we are living the life that God wants for us, and we can measure it in the lives of others when they are able to do that as well, when they have the ability to pursue a family life and to give to their community, and to participate in political culture and social culture as well. When children are educated, because education is it's part of a parent's right to have children, and part of that right is to be able to educate the children. So when children are educated, and when our elderly are not dying alone in hospitals, but are surrounded by loved ones and family. So a little bit more amorphous, no indexes, no measurements, no data.
No, but I think that's very interesting, because just like faith and reason, two similar bodies of thought have taken very different approaches to that idea of accountability, with all of the indicators and all of the strategy and surveys, of the UN, whereas it's purposely open-ended, I think, on the faith side. It is intentionally left open, just like the Beatitudes, themselves. We don't know when they're finished. There isn't a place to check it off. It is an ongoing challenge that we'll only know by our human flourishing.
And then, of course, God sees it all, right? So nothing more to say. And our conscience too, if we let it, I think that piece of God that we have inside, we certainly know. I think.
Thank you. Looks like we have one more. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dr. Scholz.
Oh, well, I was just going to say that in expanding the notion of poverty, we also have to realize that even if we do reach a stage where there is no economic poverty and there is no loneliness and all children are educated, we need to look around us, because there's probably another poverty that has developed, and we need to be constantly open to the ways that that injustice seeks in and how we can address it.
That's a great point. No, yeah, thank you. Okay, so it looks like we have one more question. Unless anyone has any, feel free to send it in the chat Q&A. If the Sustainable Development Goals began to be fully met, what do you think would be the first priority?
Well, so you say here, I would refer back to the principle of subsidiarity. It really depends. It really depends. I think that the common thread has been that they will not be achieved unless they are achieved for everyone. And certainly that is a call that is also a call to focus on the poor, for sure. But it also brings a transgenerational dimension to it all. As I said before, the unborn, those who are not on this earth yet. We know that they will be people in the future. We're banking on the survival of our species. So then, how do we ensure today that we respect their human rights? And all of the systems that we have in place are built and are predicated upon, instant gratification, profits per quarter. That is the beat to what the world moves today. And let's not be naive. So how do we change that? Big challenge. As a finance person, I will tell you that discount rate, big enemy of future generations. Because if it's in the future, it doesn't really matter. So discount it and you'll see, especially if the interest is compounded. But in any case, the point remains, right? Focusing on the poor, future generations, and that has a lot to do with the environment and how we shepherd the environment. Biodiversity, by far, we have exceeded our planetary boundaries. We are in the midst of what some scientists are calling, I believe it is the Holocene, or mass extinction caused, or the Anthropocene, sorry, Holocene, the Anthropocene, which is the mass extinction caused by the human race. And it's these are species that my kids and their kids are not going to see. It's not just about whether I appreciate the polar bears or it is intricately linked to our human health and survival. You see, we speak the same language as plants. Our DNA is, 90% the same, I think, and it is in those plants that we find the cures to the very viruses and bacteria that attack us every day. So if we destroy our ecosystems, we're basically also putting a great handicap on our future generations.
Thank you. Did you want to respond at all, Dr. Scholz?
Well, I guess the one thing that strikes me, and perhaps something that we've overlooked to some extent tonight too, is the plight of refugees, and looking at migrants and refugees, we see the constellation of all of the problems come together, and I think what Juan just said there about climate change and biodiversity, that is going to create a whole class of climate refugees too, right? As lands are destroyed, and if we look at why people are leaving, they're leaving because of poverty, because of violence, because of exploitation, because of all of the various things that lack of opportunity, all of the various things that the Sustainable Development Goals are trying to address. So, I think, yeah, I think the question is it's a really great question. It's a really big question, and it's not so easy to answer. But I think maybe this speaks to Dan's point earlier too. Both approaches, Catholic social thought and Sustainable Development Goals, are integrated, and so we can't address one problem without addressing others as well, and we see the folly when we fail. So I guess I'd just say we better, we don't like to fail in most aspects in our life, and this should be one of those aspects as well.
I love that. Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you both so much. I mean, I think this has been a wonderful, opportunity for me personally to reflect, but I'm sure, to make some larger connections. I studied global development. So, this is everything we're talking about is so, wrapped up in my passions, my studies, and I'm sure, similar for some people here tonight. So thank you so much for bringing in, those two sides of, like you're saying, both sides of that coin are so important. And it's important that we address, both the moral piece and the socio-political economic pieces, because you can't look at one without looking at the other. Yeah, no, thank you all so much for being here tonight.
Thank you. This is really fun, and I learned so much. I really appreciate your insights. Juan.
Thank you so much, Sally, Grace, and you, all your team, Holly, Kathy. Wow, really, like I said, I'm truly honored, and keep up the wonderful work. You guys are fantastic. Thank you so much for this time. I'm certainly wiser thanks to all of you, especially Sally. I was really bad at philosophy, but I loved it, and I think that's what counts.
Thanks so much, folks. Good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Grace, sir. Wait.
Sorry, I'm trying to.
I just wanted to make sure. I wanted to check in with you. Make sure you have the recording.
Yeah, for some reason my computer is like frozen right now. This happened earlier too. I'm just gonna have to wait for it to react and stop recording, but I think it went well.
Too. It was so good. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I'm so glad we could do this.
Definitely. Definitely. We'll have to try to work together again in the future too. You're graduating this year, are you?
No, I'm a sophomore.
Okay. Oh, okay. I thought you were a junior for whatever reason, but I mean, yeah, no, that's even better.
Wait, and you're a junior then?
I'm a junior, yeah.
For the longest time, I thought you were a senior.
Well, it all runs together. I will be soon enough.
I guess I don't know.
Yeah, no, you're fine. You can go. I'm literally just waiting for my thing to react.
If
Here.
you need anything, let me know.
Thank you.
Okay.
Have a good evening, Kathy.
Good night.
Good night.